Good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming to the 2021 Arts Champion Summit. I am Jeremy Loveday. I use he, him, his pronouns. I'm a Victoria City Councillor and Chair of the CRD Arts Commission. Before we go any further, I'd like to acknowledge that I am speaking to you from the territory of the Lekwungen speaking people, now known as the Songhees and Esquimalt nations. That is also where the CRD headquarters is located. And the CRD conducts its business on the territory of over 20 First Nations, including that of the Songhees, Esquimalt, Sartlip, Pahkichin, Saut, Saikum, Malahat, Beecher Bay, Suk, Pachidat, Penelakut. And today, as we dive into conversations about the future of arts and culture in the region, let's acknowledge with our words and actions that these nations have a long and rich history of art, artistic and cultural practice that continues to this day. And I invite all of us to consider how we can respectfully interact, uplift, and encourage that narrative sovereignty and arts and cultural resurgence. So I'd like to thank all of you for joining us here today as well, tuning into this discussion about reframing our arts future, hosted by the CRD Arts Commission. Outside of municipal politics, I'm active in the arts sector as a poet and founder of a small youth arts festival. And so I know firsthand the power of arts and culture to provide meaning, provide an outlet for self-expression, cultivate beauty, and create change. And so it's an honor to share the day with you and to be a part of this discussion and learn from so many of the amazing speakers we have today. And I know that many of you would rather meet in person, and because we're online, we may miss out on some of those impromptu conversations at the coffee stand and some of the opportunities for collaboration that could occur there. But as we are in a room full of people who often put on arts events, you'll know the challenges of COVID-19. And it's been amazing to see the ways that the arts and cultural sector and community has responded with resilience and creativity, as would be expected, to make sure that arts and culture continues to thrive in the region. And we made the choice to move online today so that hopefully we can have more people in one place having these important discussions in a safe way. And so I'm glad you could join us online, even if you're zoomed out, or perhaps you spent more time in front of a screen than you'd like these days. So I really do appreciate you taking the time. I'm gonna, as Arts Commission Chair, offer just a brief introduction of how we got here and why the focus of today's Arts Champion Summit is on equity. And I will do that, and then we will have an opportunity to hear from some amazing speakers through PechaKucha talks. And at the end of that, there's an opportunity for some Q&A. So just as a opening, the CRD Arts and Culture Service provides grants to nonprofit arts organizations for the development of local arts programming, to support creativity, enhance sustainability, and provide social and economic benefit to the region. And currently 9 out of 13 CRD jurisdictions participate in this service and support many arts organizations and non-arts organizations who put on arts events. And some of you may be wondering how we got here today to talk about equity. So I want to tell you a little bit about that journey. And unsurprisingly, that journey starts in the past, where we previously met 5 years ago for the CRD Arts Champion Summit to build collaboration and celebrate the achievement of the arts community. And one of the goals of that summit was to gather feedback to inform the CRD Arts and Culture planning and our strategic plan. So feedback from that summit was combined with consultations, surveys, and interviews and we received over 1,500 responses from community members. And a key takeaway was that we needed to make it easier to access CRD arts funding beyond the arts organizations that are currently established and receiving funding. So with that feedback, there was the Building Our Arts Future Together plan was created. And in 2018, CRD launched 2 new funding streams. So there was the launch of the Equity Grant and the Incubator Grant programs. And in 2019, reintroduced the IDEA grants. And of particular relevance to this conversation today is the Equity Grant. And this program was created to support arts initiatives by applicants from communities who were at risk of being excluded from arts funding, or perhaps had and have faced systemic barriers to access to funding. From this grant, we were able to support incredible projects across the region, including the Healing Drums program from Oasis Society, which connects participants with elders to make their own hand drum and brings healing music back into their life. And CFUV's Full Circle podcast by and about the BIPOC community, produced by artist Kemi Craig. And in 2020, this CRD Arts Service staff evaluated the Equity Grant program. And the report found that funded projects increased access to arts, benefiting underrepresented artists, arts groups, and audiences, and achieved the original objective of increasing access to our funds. So from there, we moved, the Arts Commission made a motion that the Equity Grant program go from being a pilot project to a core project of the Arts Commission, which I think it was a good step forward. But looking at the Equity Grant program, it is only 1% of total funding of the CRD Arts and Culture Service. So on its own, it is clear that the Equity Grant program can't address the much larger issue of systemic barriers to access to funding for arts and culture. So in order to take meaningful action, we needed to look at the entirety of the grant funding streams and the operations of the CRD Arts Commission to make sure that an equity lens is applied to all decisions. And that brings us to 2021. And so just a few months ago, the CRD Arts Advisory Council, which is a team of volunteer community representatives who many of you might know as the people who do the adjudication of grants. From there was an EDI subcommittee formed. And this subcommittee is charged with applying an equity lens and providing the Arts Commission with recommendations. So based on our surveying, we knew that the region's arts community was interested in convening around topics of equity, diversity, and inclusion. And we also knew that there is so much of this important conversation happening in the community right now, and so many organizations and artists who are really leading on this in our community. And so we, as an Arts Commission and the Arts Service, want to learn from that and reflect that. So in that spirit of looking at the region's arts from diverse perspectives and reconsidering the way we operate, we decided that the theme of this year's Arts Champion Summit should be reframing our arts future. And so today's events will inform the work of the EDI subcommittee as they begin to develop and gather recommendations to make to the CRD Arts and Cultural Support Service to make sure that funding opportunities are equitable. So I hope today's events are an opportunity for all of us to learn and celebrate the people and organizations who've taken on the work of creating a more diverse and inclusive and equitable arts ecosystem long before it was a hashtag or before the Arts Commission committed to this process of creating an equity lens. So I hope we can discuss where we are now and what changes need to come to create an environment where arts practitioners and audiences of varied experiences and identities can thrive and develop. And I hope that everyone who attends today, myself included, is able to take something back to our organizations, to our communities, and to our practices that will allow us to make a commitment to take the action that is very much needed. So before we get started with our PechaKuchas, I want to remind you to type any questions you have for our presenters into the Q&A. And after all the presentations, we will have a moderated Q&A session where you can have many questions answered, as many as we have time for. And our next presenter today is Tiffany Choswold, who's the founder of the Embrace Arts Foundation, which is a multidisciplinary arts organization for individuals of all abilities. She is also a multidisciplinary artist and arts educator whose practices are rooted in movement and play. She is a chronically ill individual whose lived experiences inform her desire to create accessible artistic spaces. Her presentation today is titled The Development of Chile. So please give a warm welcome for Tiffany.
Great. Hello, everyone. I am here to share about the development of Embrace's recent show, Chile, which was filmed on the traditional territories of the Wasanich, as well as in the territory of the Lekwungen-speaking people known today as the Songhees and Esquimalt Nation. I should probably start with a quick little introduction here. As Jeremy said, I'm Tiffany, and I'm the Executive Director of Embrace Arts Foundation, and our mandate is to create artistic opportunities for individuals of all abilities. We use the term all abilities within our community, as there is a wide array of how folks self-identify. In our community, we have folks who are neurodivergent, autistic, disabled, a person with a disability, chronically ill, able-bodied, and everything in between. So because of that, you're going to hear a wide variety of descriptors related to ability in this presentation today. So what was Chile? We wanted to make a project that could be enjoyed by all ages, but with our primary focus on creating something that would be exciting for neurodivergent kids and kids with complex care needs. Now, I want you to consider something. If you're not selecting who you're making your work for, you have made a choice. You have picked a default audience. The audiences who have historically written the reviews on performance or have written the books on performance, those who have historically been teaching about how to create performance. They're definitely not the only audiences you could be making for, and might I even say that you should be making for. So when we decided to make Chile, we set out to make it with neurodivergent kids and kids with complex care needs at the center of our creation process. So if we're going to make a show for this audience, then obviously who needed to be involved were neurodivergent and disabled artists, which luckily for us, the vast majority of artists working with Embrace, myself included, fall within this realm. One of the lead artists that we brought onto the project was Adam. Adam is an artist living with autism and epilepsy and likes creating things that are really playful and childlike. You can see him there. It's a natural fit to develop this piece with. So after we got our initial team together, we came up with this super exciting plan, and here it was. Chile was going to be an interactive, story-based installation set in a wintry landscape. This rich sensory experience was going to involve a diverse range of auditory, visual, and tactile play. That's right. We were going to make a touch-based public installation and had received funding to do so. And you can see where this is going. Obviously, along came March 2020, and suddenly everything we wanted to be doing had to change. But we were still really intent on keeping the true spirit of the project. We wanted to know how could we keep our core audience at the center of the work we were making. We knew we had to film a project, but we also knew that that wasn't going to be enough for our audiences. I was determined that maybe we could send some kind of something to someone's home, like a package. Maybe there could be books, or there could be some kind of elements that they could interact with. So we'd keep that multi-sensory idea, but I was a little bit stuck. So I went to talk with Adam, and he came in hot with some autistic ingenuity at its finest. He proposed making something like a busy board. If you're not familiar, it's just like what's on the screen. And so that's how our board maps were born. We created busy boards that were maps that followed the narrative of our story. And we had the best time making those, picking out textures and colors and elements that were going to be exciting to our core audiences, finding things that were enjoyable for Adam and myself, both of us being neurodivergent, but having different experiences of what bring us sensory joy. We dreamed up moving parts and how we could create open-ended play. And then we created the maps. Or more specifically, Aaron and Alexa, who were working with us, were also involved in the design of the boards, took on the monumental task of making those. It was like a toy shop. And then during the same season, we started creating elements for the performance, so everything went together. Up on the screen are Adam's drawings of Chile. And I am so very thankful that we worked with puppeteer and puppet maker Randy Edmondson, and she did an amazing job of translating Adam's things into this puppet that our audiences loved. I still regularly get asked by children in our community about Chile and how Chile's doing. So then, with everything set, our All Abilities cast came together and filmed in small groups. It was a mix of some of our more seasoned performers and our youth performers. And once everything was edited together, we created 2 versions, one with captions and one with ASL, as we were trying to make it as accessible as possible. Though it was imperfect because we weren't able to create an audio description for this piece, something we are hoping to do with more of our future shows, as we have a lot of blind and low vision individuals in our community. Then the piece was released out into the world, and it was available over the course of the weekend for audiences to enjoy. The boards were available for local audiences to pick up or were delivered to those who need support. And having Chile available to watch as much as you want over the course of a weekend was also part of making this for our core audience, as so many of the individuals in our core audiences love repetition. And so it was out in the world, and how was it received? Adult audiences had generally positive feedback. It was fun. Some people got it. Some people were kind of indifferent to it. It was okay. But kids loved it, especially neurodivergent kids, kids with complex care needs that we had designed it for. Parents and school programs emailed saying that their kids watched it several times over the course of the weekend, that they played with the maps, that they danced along. And not only were they delighted by the story and the boards, but they were genuinely excited to be seeing disabled artists who looked like them on the screen. It was so exciting. But my biggest indicator of success for this project, beyond those family emails or reviews from adults, there's an autistic preteen in our community who is in a lot of Embraces programs, and I see her at least once a week, and she's great. Now, Chile came out quite a while ago. This was a winter project, and yet almost every week she comes to tell me, do you remember when we watched Chile? That was so funny. And that's how I know that we made what we had set out to create in the first place. Excellent. So thank you so much for letting me share about that. I really appreciate you taking the time to hear about this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. It's so great to hear about the story of the creation of Chile and the creation of playful and interactive art experiences. I think it really tells a story and shows how art is for everyone. And one note that I wrote down is that if you're not choosing who you're making your work for or who your audience is, that in itself is an active choice. And so I really just thank you for sharing that story and for your work with us today. Our next PechaKucha talk is by Mercedes Bátiz-Benét, who, in addition to being the artistic director of Puente Theatre, is a multidisciplinary artist and writer. Born and raised in Mexico, Mercedes approaches expression from as many angles as possible, having worked as a writer, dramaturge, a director, set and costume designer, translator, adapter, actor, puppeteer, multimedia artist, screenwriter, film and video editor, cinematographer, and director. Her presentation today is titled Creating Opportunities for Immigrant and IBPoC artists in our community. Please give a very warm welcome to Mercedes.
Thank you, Jeremy, so much. And I'm honored and grateful to be sharing this presentation from the Congo territory. When you think of a playwright, who springs to mind? This guy? Still, aren't there any other options? What if the person who sprung to mind was a woman? What if she wasn't British? What if she was a woman of color? By the end of this presentation, when you think of a playwright, I hope you have some other faces to choose from. From 40 people I asked, all of them said Shakespeare. Here's the situation. The most recent study on gender equity in Canadian theatre was by the Playwrights Guild of Canada in 2015. It found that less than a quarter of the plays produced in Canada are by women, even though they constitute 59% of actual audiences. 2/3 of playwrights are females. This gap gets worse at larger and more prominent theaters. Plays by women tended to be produced by smaller companies or for young audiences, which means their incomes in the sector as a whole were found to be 31% lower than that of men. So this is incredibly, it's a situation that demands our attention and for all of us to come together to change this. Meanwhile, 21.5% of the Canadian population that are newcomers, 17.7% of us are the children of newcomers. That's nearly a third of our country. Do they see themselves on our stages? Are they encouraged to be part of the cultural conversation? I just want to let us sit with those questions for a second. Visible minorities now account for 22.3% of the total population. And yet, and this is depressing, women who are Indigenous, Black, or of color hold only 3.7% of leadership positions in Canadian theatre today. That's an abysmal stat. Puente Theatre exists to change those numbers. Our mandate is to give voice to immigrant and IBPoC artists. Moreover, the company was founded 33 years ago by an immigrant woman, Lina de Guevara, and continues to be led by myself. And in our 33-year-long history, at least 90% of our work has been written, directed, produced, created, and performed by women. An example is our most recent production of Fado, the saddest music in the world, which was written, directed, and designed by women. 3 of the main characters are women, and we're very honored that it won the inaugural JMAC Award for Outstanding Production in 2020 in the Pro Arts Awards. But then the pandemic hit, which has made it difficult for theater artists to reach our audiences. But in some ways, it has been a moment of quiet to focus on creative new work so that when it's finally over, we'll be ready to fill our theaters with a great swarm of exciting new plays. We're heading into a renaissance, and it's vitally important that the true gender and cultural diversity of our country is at the table. And so Puente has greatly expanded our support for developing new plays by providing infrastructure, networking, experience, exposure, and most importantly, income to IBPoC, newcomer, and female and gender diverse playwrights. We can seize the opportunity that this turbulent time offers to remake Canadian theatre from the ground up. Workplay. First, we've doubled the scope of our long-running workplay program, an annual residency of emerging playwrights writing about identity, who receive 8 months of dramaturgical support, up to 40 hours of studio time, a 1,500 honorarium, and a reading of the finished play open to the public or to an invited audience of industry professionals for feedback. Naya Davis is one of our workplay residents this year, artists. There are non-binary mixed race emerging artists based in Victoria, BC. Naya is a recent graduate of the CCPA College, Enriched Performing Arts, and Applied Performing Arts Diploma program. There, they developed their skills as a performer, playwright, and director. Jane Walling is an international multidisciplinary artist who is graduate of the Canadian College of Performing Arts in Victoria, George Brown Theatre School in Toronto, and École Philippe Collier in France. Her play, Nana, tells the story of a woman rocked by the death of her closest family member, mentor, and heroine, her Mauritian grandmother, as she pieces together the fragments of family past woven with secrets and lies. And this year, Puente and Intrepid Theatre teamed up to create a new micro-residency and mentorship program called Converge that supports emerging and early career Indigenous, Black, and artists of color to develop work. We offer space, most importantly, mentorship by IBPoC mentors, and an honor area to each participant. Regina Rios is a Mexican-born theater artist and our first Converge artist. She came in 2017 to further develop her artistry as an actor, singer, dancer, and creator. Regina created a 10-minute performance piece that explores through a personal lens the systemic classism and racism present in Mexico. Converge, the second participant was Rory Kiwatin, who is a new Cree woman. Her piece was entitled Remembering Reconciliation, and it elaborates on an evolutionary step upon reminiscences of reconciliation, her previous one-man show. Rory's residency explored her new identity as a woman, as well as what the world sees as a fairly hidden genocide in Canada. Her mentor was Crystal Cook. Olivia was her third Converge resident. Olivia Wheeler is a mixed-race performance designer, composer, and interdisciplinary artist of Chinese and mixed European descent. As an emerging artist, her artistic and technical work in sound design, scenography, music direction, and composition aim to challenge the definition of each of these practices by pushing the parameters of traditional theater. Bridging the gap. We've also achieved special one-time funding from the Victoria Foundation for a one-time program specifically designed to provide support to newcomer female and gender diverse playwrights, providing them with dramaturgical support plus a $6,000 commissioning fee that gives them the most crucial resource they need, time. Marilo Nunez, one of our Bridging the Gap playwrights, is a Chilean-Canadian playwright and director. She is the 2018 recipient of the Hamilton Awards for Established Theater Artists and has been shortlisted for the K.M. Hunter Artist Award in Theater twice. She will begin her residency in February. The second one is Tembeline Moyo, who's an established playwright from Zimbabwe, writing about women and girls' stories. We are very lucky and honored that she will be joining our Bridging the Gap residency, and she will also be taking a position at UVic starting in September. Each playwright we encourage has an impact larger than themselves. IBPoC women will believe they have voices worth hearing, and most importantly, diverse audiences will begin to see themselves on our stages. We believe we're making a difference in how the arts look, who gets to see themselves on stage, who feels like the arts are for them, whose experience matters, and who is welcome to the table. Thank you so much for listening. And if you're asking yourself as an audience, what can you do to help us? Show up. Show up to their work, show up to their place, help them share their stories as we are hoping to do it as well. Thank you so much for having me in this circle.
Thank you very much for your presentation and for all of your work. I've personally been inspired by your work and the work of Puente Theatre for many years. It's great to hear your presentation today, and really lays out the stats behind that illuminate the inequality in pay and opportunities, and also what we're missing out on in terms of the powerful, beautiful, and transformative work that could go unseen if access barriers aren't eliminated, and if equity is not found in the arts and cultural sector. So I really thank you for your presentation and for all of your work. Our next presenter today is Kenji Maeda. Kenji's experiences are diverse and grounded in his passion for the arts, education, and community building, and influenced by his Uchenanchu heritage. He is executive director of Greater Vancouver Professional Theatre Alliance, as well as an artsvest BC program manager for business, arts, and a sessional instructor for Simon Fraser University, and a consultant. In addition to all of these roles, Kenji also sits on the board of Mass Culture, a national organization where research arts intersect, and an alum of the Banff Center's Cultural Leadership Program. He speaks to you today on being in community, being in conversation. So thank you very much. Please give a very warm welcome to Kenji.
Thank you, Jeremy. Hi, Sai, Wani, Maeda, Kenji, Yaibing. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kenji Maeda. My pronouns are he and him. I am of Uchinanchu heritage, which is also known as the people of Okinawa, which has its own distinct culture, language, and history with colonization. I'm currently based on the unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations, but I was born and raised on the unceded territories of the Lake-Wataw people, including the Wee-Way-Kai, Wee-Way-Kum, and Queequeg First Nations, also known as Kemba River, a little bit north of where most of you are based today. These are my parents on the left, Takeo Tony Maeda, and then Kazue Maeda on the right. That photo was taken in about 2012 in our family-run Kodo Japanese restaurant in Kemba River. The restaurant was literally where I grew up, and I hosted most of my birthday parties, as you can see in the top right. There, I was about 5 years old and much younger below there. My parents introduced Japanese food and sushi and raw fish to so many people in the region, and generations of families came through our doors. And rather than just selling food as a transaction, we believed it was an opportunity for our family to share a little bit about our culture, our stories, and ourselves with the community. After almost 40 years in operation and 3 years after my dad passed away, we closed the restaurant in 2019. In many ways, very thankful that it happened before COVID because it destroyed so many businesses. But we still had mixed feelings about closing the restaurant, but we knew it was the right decision for our family. So I asked my friend and filmmaker, Joella Caballu, to document the final days. She and cinematographer Milena Salazar captured the community coming together to celebrate a life, an entity that was Kodo, our de facto home, which we believed was a space for the community. We ended up premiering the film earlier this year at Doxa Documentary Film Festival, and it was the first opportunity for my mom on the left there and our family to hear candid interviews expressing love and appreciation, memories and stories you normally wouldn't hear because you don't typically ask pointed questions about one's experience with a business. You know, for me, documentaries as a genre parallels some of my professional practice. It includes a lot of listening and observing, leading with curiosity, asking tough questions, and sometimes revealing even tougher answers. And this has been central to my practice of exploring change, making change, and advocating for change in the arts and culture sector. Over the years, I've had many conversations about the challenges of the nonprofit structure with the boards at the top, who often have little to no direct experience of the programs and services that are being delivered. And yes, I chose those on the bottom because they're all holding a staff-like object. So board and staff, just to add a bit of flair there. At GVPTA, although we have an excellent group of board members with experience and expertise in theater, we also wanted to have more representation of individuals who have historically been marginalized and underrepresented. We recognize that joining the board is not actually a viable option for everyone in terms of time commitment as a volunteer, the responsibilities of financial oversight and governance. So we ended up launching the Community Council with 8 theater community members selected through an application process, and they represent a diversity of practices and perspectives and lived experiences. And the council is considered a third part of GVPTA's organizational model. With the council, we aim to address challenges with engagement by paying the council for meetings and prep, recognizing that varying levels of capacity throughout the year, addressing access needs as fundamental, and approaching our relationship as we go to you versus you come to us. And our primary goal the whole time is to continue to build trust. And what we continue to move toward in our practice is to embrace the power of our network and leveraging the expertise and experiences that already exist with reciprocity in mind. And we ask ourselves, how can we make theater better by intentionally facilitating and intervening? And how can we make theater better by intentionally getting out of the way? Indigenous and racialized individuals make up 36% of BC's population, but in April's report, we shared that across 200 arts organizations, they only represent 20% of senior staff and 22% of board members. One thing to consider, though, when it comes to data, is that data can be a useful tool to better understand the broad community and inform decisions that you might make. But data can also be used as a tool to silence and ignore the realities of a minority group if the surveys and data are not carefully considered. And so whether I'm convening people, thinking up new projects, or strategizing with colleagues, I think a lot about what I learned from attending a workshop by Elwood Jimmy and Vanessa Andriotti. They talked about different ways of knowing and different ways of being using the analogies of bricks and threads, where brick sensibilities are more structured, individualistic, hierarchical, and linear. Thread sensibilities are based on interwoven relationships, flexibility, and is very, very much layered and interconnected. And as someone who really does appreciate learning through visualized concepts, their book has been a must read. We are at a critical time in the arts and culture community where organizations and individuals are at very different stages of understanding and action toward equitable practices. And I do believe that most are trying to move forward with concrete steps, but we often view the struggle and discomfort that we feel as a knot to untangle. But I believe that the knot actually exists as it is. And it simply represents a path which will include twists and turns, ups and downs, steps forwards and backwards, whether through developing policies or jumping into difficult conversations. I still have a lot of work to do to be better as an individual and on behalf of organizations that I represent. In a restaurant, one thing is generally true. Everyone comes in because they're hungry. Some dishes are more complicated than others and will take more time to prepare. And some dishes are relatively straightforward, but we work hard to feed everyone because we believe everyone should be cared for and nourished. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kenji, for being here and for sharing that little piece of both your personal and professional story. I think we've got a lot to learn from what you shared. And one of the notes that I wrote down, and I think it will help guide me through the day, and maybe others will align with that as well, is just leading with curiosity and asking tough questions. And I think that is something that is, I think, an important approach. And with that, I'd like to thank all the presenters this morning. There's just so much wisdom, generosity, and talent shared with us today. And I think it gives us a lot to help guide us through this day. And also like to thank all of you for showing up, and also the CRD Arts staff who put this on, Vimala Jeevanandam, Chris Gilpin, and Heather Haywood for all their organizing efforts. We will now have a Q&A with the panelists, and so I'd like to invite Vimala, who is the Community Outreach Coordinator for CRD Arts and Culture, who will be moderating the panel.
Hello. So I would just like to invite anyone who has a question to type it into the Q&A. And we have about a little under 20 minutes to answer anything that you have to ask. I guess one thing that I have been wondering is, this is a question for all of the panelists, is what do you envision for your organization or your community in the next few years? and what do you need to make that happen? Tiffany, could I start with you?
Sure. One of the big moves that's happening currently in our organization is to have more individuals who have lived experience with disability or being neurodivergent in leadership roles within our community. And that's, I think that will continue to push the work forward. We actually just finished last month a program where we did training for a small group of artists who identify as either disabled or neurodivergent, and provided teacher training, and they've moved into the teaching staff of our community, and that's really exciting. But if there's one thing that I could say that we need, would be space that we would be able to work. It's very, very difficult for us in this city, considering we don't have our own space, to find space to rent to host these classes when there are so many places that are not physically accessible in the city. It's been really challenging trying to find places for these new teachers who are now trained to go teach their dance classes and teach their theater classes when there are so few spaces. Yeah, so something thinking about.
I think space is something that has come up a few times. Lindsay, you also mentioned that as something that is constraining. Is there other supports that could help in finding and securing those types of spaces?
Absolutely. I think absolutely there's space. I think we have to, again, look at, who are we prioritizing in terms of these spaces? Identifying the gaps in these conversations like this is really critical because it points to the solution. And so with the culture then in particular, with the society that we created, just to let people know the phase in terms of where we're at is in the development of our governance structure. And so really looking at how we operate, what type of programming that we operate. And so this assessment that we're doing as a society is really about coming to really address what those needs are. And so for us in particular, I mean, we see it in the subconscious. We see it that it's yet to be manifested, but the vision of having studio spaces where we can actualize healing through the arts for diverse cultural people, activating performing arts, not just in terms of Western approaches, but looking at all kinds of dance, Indigenous dance, global Indigenous dance. And so we need space for that, spaces that really, I think, are reflective also of our ideologies and our worldviews. And so it is one aspect that I think a lot of us have been talking about in this city for a long time. I know that there's been some surveys done and some work even that the First Peoples Cultural Council has done with the city of Victoria and their new infrastructure grants that they want to promote cultural spaces. So I think we're all on the same page, and we're just trying to develop a shared language, I think, in this city together. And yeah.
Is there anyone else who'd like to speak to that question, either of where you see yourself going, or to the questions of space and needs? Go ahead, Mercedes.
Thank you. I think the majority of the organizations in Victoria need space. We need space to create our work, to develop our work, to share our work. I think that's something that's really lacking, I think, in every practice, to be able to do this, to do our work properly. And I think that because it becomes a vicious cycle. If we don't have a space to create our work, we don't get the attention of the media, we don't get more audience members, et cetera, et cetera. So it becomes that much harder for small organizations to be able to help our communities, help build community. because we don't have those physical spaces. So that's one very, very important thing. I hope that our company continues to grow and that we have more capacity building also to be able to hire at a full-time more artists, more people that help us build our company and those opportunities for our community. But definitely space is something that for us is crucial in order to build our shows, rehearse them, and then to show them. In Victoria, there's really like 3 theaters and 2 of them are always busy with their own shows. So the rest of the community has 1 theater that also hosts 2 festivals of their own. So there's minimal time and space to be able to show our work. And so it's something that I think as a community we should invest in, and we should have, I know there have been many talks about it, but it's an urgent thing on the agenda of the community, I think. And with that, I have to apologize because I have to go do a root canal. So I have to leave now because I have to be there in 15 minutes. My apologies. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining. And yeah, it was great to learn from you.
Thank you so much. Bye.
So Kenji, we have a question specific for you. She is intrigued by the idea of community council and is wondering if you have a specific resource that helped you develop that.
Certainly, if people have questions, I'm happy to answer by email as well. What we we looked at actually Mass Culture. So I'm on the board of Mass Culture, which is based in Toronto, but it's a national organization. It operates very similarly in terms of a decentralized structure of governance. And so there are kind of pods of committees or working groups that help to divide kind of work for the organization, but also in terms of policies and practices as well. So on their website, they have a full kind of list of their procedures and policies that I think is really interesting to look at. I also would look at just other, I forget the name of it now, but there's a Kelowna organization that is specifically around more circular structured organizations. And so, but I can put it in the chat or put it in an email later on. But certainly there are a lot of places, but I also want to recognize that what we're doing art is not new. It's many cultures, many groups already do circular structured decision making, and so I don't want us to take the credit for something that's special, because it's not. It has always existed. It's just that we've been trained to work within Robert's rules and the board structure and the hierarchy, and so that's kind of the thing that we're trying to figure out and just dismantle or disconnect so that we can give more agency back to artists and arts workers.
I just want to add a little bit to what you're saying, Kenji, because I think it's critical in looking at the systems that we uphold and continue to uphold. And so, I mean, it kind of relates to, I am Indigenous to my body in a ways that we have to change our own internal system to dismantle the systems outside of ourselves. But you know, this is the tension I think that we are all facing in terms of the past and the future, you know, and that's going up to the mountain. What do you have to leave up at that mountain for able to go into that council to reactivate that knowledge that is actually within the strength of the group, rather than this outside systems, and then that starts to dictate the way that we operate. And so part of moving onward, I think, in terms of organizations and just even in people in directorial positions, artistic directing positions, it's like, what is the structure? What is the system that your society operates under? And how do we take a step back objectively to develop that new language that is actually an old language? And so I love what you're saying, that this stuff does exist, you know, but we've been conditioned to think that outside of ourselves are the answer, and so to challenge that.
Just one thing to add to that, Lindsay, is that we often, the last few years in particular, we've been really focused on policy development around equitable practices, being good people, all that kind of stuff. But the fact is that people are not embodying it. And that's kind of what I'm hearing from you. And so, but there are also organizations and leaders who don't have the policies, but have been embodying it for years and generations because they understand it, they know it, they lived it. And so how do we get from policy development and guidelines and the embodiment, and how do we kind of overlap them within organizations so that we're actually doing it without needing to think and read policy? It just is. And that's kind of, I think, where the struggle is that we're seeing.
Beauty, I love that. The embodiment of these values and principles, yeah. And that's again why I wasn't saying I'm theorizing this stuff. It's more of like I've lived this. I know this works. Okay, this is the place that I'll share from. And you know, in that same way, Tiffany, you knowing, you know, the people that you're working with, you see the ground. You're at the ground. We're all at the ground level, and so we're speaking from that place.
Thank you. A question I have for Tiffany is, but I think this is applicable to everyone, is how do we create a community hub in the region for accessibility in the arts? And Tiffany, do you have any thoughts for the first steps and considerations to make this happen? Do you think it's feasible and manageable? So that's a few questions.
It is a few questions, and I would love everyone else's insight in this too. But one of the things that immediately comes to mind is that I don't want to be rude about this, but we've had for years conversation about making this in this community, about making this shared art space. And I think there's a deep longing for it within our community. It has been voiced that people need this accessible art space, accessible on so many different levels, and a space to connect. And because we don't have that kind of centralized space anywhere, that we continue to be a little more siloed than we'd like to be, and to have that kind of space would come together. And honestly, in terms of first steps and considerations, I think it's time for action. I think we have talked it in circles, and kind of what both Kenji and Lindsay were saying about embodying, acting into these things. There is so much that we already intrinsically know, and in those conversations has come up. I think we as a people, arts community, know how to be in community with each other if we're allowed to be. So that's maybe not quite as direct action, but in terms of answering some of those questions. But I think that we just need to get a move on it. And I'd be curious if anyone has any other thoughts on that.
You're right on the money.
Thank you. The next question I have is, how does the existing structure of arts administration, how the cultural sector is governed, funded, or how does that impact your arts practice and work? Lindsay, or does anyone want to take that on?
I think the only thing that sort of comes to my mind in terms of the cultural dense society is that we are so new. And so this is something that we're all really taking into consideration, because we've had all of these settler indigenous relations that focused on reconciliation. And so, I think in the last, couple of years here in Victoria, last 10 years for sure, the conversations within the arts, in the art galleries, the exhibitions, and all of this is something that I think Tiffany are saying we're all developing this. We've all been doing this. Now, how do we sort of bring it all together into fruition? And I know the relationality, even with, the BC Arts Council, the First Peoples Cultural Council. I mean, that's something that in terms of leadership, who is stepping up to create these relationships and nurture these relationships. And I think in our process as a culture dense society, we could see that longing, again, that longing of something that needs to exist. I think for our civic engagement. I don't think it's even confined to artists and their autonomy and self-determining and cultural spaces. You know, I think Victoria is an amazing place with amazing infrastructure of artists with a history and a trajectory of evolution. And so why can't we become a hub for international relations, looking outside of indigeneity, kind of expanding that into global conversations? And so, you know, administration really comes down to, you know, leadership, you know, and really, I think so those two things, leadership and this relationality of establishing relations, so people know the work that you're doing. And I know how hard it is, even personally, to step out into that. You know, we need to trust each other. We need to feel safe again. And I think we're working towards that.
Thank you. I'm going to go back to my my questions. I was wondering, what are the projects that you wish you were able to do, the things that you envision, and what would it take for that to be possible? Like the things that you want to do, but maybe are not able to do in this moment.
I'll jump in. One of the things that we started pre-COVID was a training subsidy program where it was really small. Like we were trying to give $200 away to our artists to just do some professional development, whatever they wanted to do. We just said, we will reimburse you up to $200 to do stuff. And, you know, as a nonprofit organization, as a charity, we have very strict guidelines around how we use money and what it can be used for. And so it's still something that we're exploring around how do we, because most grants are not eligible for individuals. And so how do we get money to individuals to do their work, to live their life as an artist? And so that's something that we'll continue to kind of explore within the constructs of the system that exists. Because one of the things that we partnered with was CERA, which is the Sector Equity, I forget the full name, but it was the money where we gave to BIPoC artists across the province, and we gave about, I think, $200,000 away, of about $1,000 per person. It was unconditional. And it's like, if you need money because of COVID, here you go. It was an application process. But that went, to me, it was just, I thought about, like, people just need money, and we see information about why the CRB program and was successful in many ways to support individuals, and it's being you know, it's disappearing as a program, and how can we, and that's what people still want, is like, we just need to be able to pay for food and shelter. The wages for arts and culture workers are so pitiful that there's nowhere else to go. And right now, I'm actually particularly concerned that people are leaving the sector, people are leaving their arts practice because it's not a viable option for them. And so we just need to figure out how to fix that.
I just wanted to jump in because that sort of links back to something I was thinking about, that question related to the existing structure of arts administration, how that's impacting arts practice. It's a thing for everyone in the current structure. We spend so much time writing and convincing people that our practices are meaningful. And there's so much time is spent that way. And I think particularly of marginalized communities where you're not getting that. You have to have other work. You can't just be an arts worker with how you are to exist. And I think about within our arts community, just such limited capacity, both myself as a chronically ill individual, but lots of the disabled individuals in our community. I'm spending all my time writing. I have just lost all my spoons. I'm not making anymore. I've convinced you. I've spent all this time trying to convince you that I can make this, and now I don't have no energy, I have no capacity. I've used it all in convincing you that I should make this art. And I think that's a structural thing that just ties in with what you were saying, Kenji. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have time for one last question. And can anyone speak to what transformation means to them or their organization or artistic practice? Lindsay, I think I was thinking a little bit about what it would mean for us to be connected to our bodies, both like individuals and organizations, and what that would bring to practices, and what that transformation could entail. Is that something?
I just go with instinct right now. And so the first thing that sort of comes to my mind in terms of transformation is a story. It's a really short story. So during this process of Visible Bodies, we meet every Sunday from 11 till 1 o'clock. We do our training, different facilitators come in. Last year, we had a member come in because she got lost in the building, and she ended up into the Visible Bodies, and we had known each other, but she didn't know this was happening. And so I said, hey, do you want to stay? And we kind of looked at it as a serendipitous alignment. And so she began to become part of Visible Bodies, with always a desire and a love for dance, a love for movement, always wanted to step into this space. And so the spirit had brought her into the Visible Bodies Collective. And so she's been part of this collective for a year, learning embodiment training, not just from myself, but Joe Leslie and all of the other women that come and participate. Last Sunday, she facilitated her first session for Visible Bodies Collective. And so the transformation for me is really about creating those atmospheres where people could step into their power, where it's okay to be powerful, that it's okay to embrace the power of yourself and others. And so that's a transformative space, because everybody's gifts are activated, and there's an immersion of a shared collective knowledge that becomes impenetrable. And that's what I think our arts communities, breaking these silos, breaking these dichotomies, breaking the competition, breaking the narcissism, the supremacy, and really grounding down into those embodied teachings that we all need to move from the mental into our heart center. And that's the way of that's the spiritual war that we've been at for hundreds and thousands of years. And so it looks like this way in this civilization. And so we have to always put up that good fight. And that's what we're all here doing, I think. I feel it.
So I think that's a really good way for us to end off for now. I really want to thank all of you for sharing your work and your stories.